Most folks remember the day they met someone who changed their life. For Clara Barnes, that day began with the sound of a gunshot and ended with her hands covered in a stranger's blood. The cabin had sat quiet on the edge of Elk Creek for 7 winters straight, tucked deep in pine and powder, far from the town's busybodies and whispering mouths. Clara liked it that way. Out here, no one asked why a woman lived alone, or what happened to the man who once built that porch swing now broken and lopsided. No one questioned the quiet grief stitched into the hem of her apron or the pistol she kept loaded near the front door. That morning, a storm was crawling in over the ridge, dragging a bellyful of snow behind it. Clara had just finished splitting kindling when she spotted the figure. He was stumbling through the white like a ghost out of her past, torn, hat missing, one hand pressed to his side like he was holding himself together. He made it within 10 feet of her porch before she raised the rifle. Breath caught between panic and memory. "Don't take another step," she warned, voice sharp as the air. "I don't care if you're lost, hurt, or heaven sent. I ain't got space for trouble." The man looked up, lips cracked and dry, and in that moment something shifted. Not in him, in her. Because he didn't reach for a weapon, didn't beg or threaten, he just nodded, like he understood. Then he collapsed. Clara cursed under her breath, heart pounding. She didn't want this, not another body to bury, not another name to forget. But as she knelt beside him, hands trembling, she saw the bullet hole through his shoulder and the blood soaking through his coat. Her shot, her choice. She dragged him inside with more anger than strength, muttering the whole way, "You stupid, stupid fool. Why'd you have to come round my land?" But by the time she laid him on the old cot near the hearth, something in her voice had softened. The fire snapped as she stitched his wound by lantern light, hands steady now with purpose. He was burning up with fever, mumbling things she didn't understand, names maybe, regrets she didn't ask, not yet. That night, Clara sat beside him long after the fire died low, watching the snow pile up at the door. She didn't know his name, didn't know if he'd live through till morning, but she did know one thing: he didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a man who'd run out of road, and for the first time in years, Clara didn't feel entirely alone. If you were Clara, would you have let him in? Or left the past frozen in the snow? Drop your thoughts in the comments. It only gets more tangled from here. Morning came slow and grey, with the storm still whispering against the windows. Clara stirred the ashes and built the fire back up before checking on him, half hoping he'd be gone, half scared he was. But he was still there, jaw clenched, sweat beading along his hairline. The fever hadn't broken. She pressed a damp cloth to his brow, murmuring things she hadn't said aloud in years. "You got yourself into a mess, didn't you?" Her voice wasn't angry now. It was tired, kind, like she was talking to someone who already belonged here. He stirred, eyes fluttering, lips dry and cracked. "Water," he rasped. She hesitated just a beat, then reached for the tin cup by the stove. "Don't think this makes us friends," she said softly, lifting it to his lips. "I still shot you, and you still ain't explained why you were on my land." His hand brushed hers, barely there. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said hoarsely. "Didn't even see the cabin till I was right on it." She studied him a moment. Under the grime and blood, he looked no older than 30, maybe younger. His beard was ragged, his coat worn to threads, but it was the look in his eyes, somewhere between regret and relief, that made her pause. "You got a name?" she asked. He winced as he shifted. "Ash." She didn't say hers. Not yet. She changed the bandage that afternoon, fingers careful, deliberate. The bullet hadn't hit bone, just muscle, but it would hurt like the devil for weeks. Still, he didn't complain, just watched her with eyes that missed nothing, even through the pain. By the second day, he managed to sit up. That's when he noticed a photograph on the mantel. A man in uniform, dark eyes, smile too small. "Your husband?" Ash asked quietly. Clara didn't look up. "I'm sorry." She nodded once. "You a soldier?" was, he said, echoing her tone. "Long time ago." They didn't speak more after that, but something unspoken began to shift in the quiet between them, like the way you notice spring arriving, not all at once, but in the slow melt of snow off the roof. That night, she poured 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. He gave her a look of thanks, and she didn't pretend not to see it. Later, when he drifted into sleep again, she found herself pulling the quilt higher over his chest, tucking him in like she used to do for someone she loved long ago. And just before blowing out the lamp, she whispered, almost to herself, Don't give me a reason to regret this, Ash. But deep in her bones, Clara already knew he wasn't here by accident. On the third day, Clara found Ash standing barely by the window, the quilt draped over his good shoulder like a cape. Snow still fell outside, quiet and steady, blurring the pine ridge into a smear of white. He stared at it like he was trying to remember something. "You shouldn't be up," she said, tying her braid with a bit of twine. "You'll rip that shoulder clean open." He didn't look back. Didn't mean to stay long. Clara let the silence settle. Then she crossed her arms, leaned against the table, and said calmly, "But you did." Ash finally turned. "Didn't have much of a choice, did I?" "You had one. You could have died out there." He gave her a slow smile, crooked, worn, but not unkind. "Well, I almost did. That day, she let him help with the dishes, just drying, mostly. Still, it felt strange, sharing the rhythm of her cabin life with someone else. The clink of tin plates, the smell of beans simmering on the stove, his quiet movements beside her, all pressed against some old part of her she'd sealed off years ago. At one point, she caught him glancing at the bookshelf. Just 3 old volumes sat there, a Bible, a book of poems her mother had loved, and a journal her husband once wrote in but never finished. "You read?" she asked. Ash nodded. "When I can find something worth reading." She hesitated, then reached for the poetry book, dusted it off, and handed it to him. "Start with page 23. That one always felt honest. He took it carefully, like it might break in his hands. Sat near the hearth. "Read without speaking." That night, after the lantern was out and the cabin settled, Ash broke the quiet from the cot. "You ever lose someone, the kind that don't come back?" Clara, lying awake with her eyes on the dark beams above, answered softly, "I lost someone I thought never would leave. Turns out the war don't care who you pray to." Ash was quiet for a moment, then voice low, "I wasn't on the right side of it." She turned her head slowly. "You mean you fought for the South?" "No," he said. "I mean I fought for me, not for anything else. Just wanted to survive. Took pay wherever it came. Some days, I still don't know what that made me." Clara sat up, her face lit by the dying fire. "It made you someone who's still alive. That's more than a lot of good men can say." Ash didn't respond, but his jaw tightened just slightly, like her words struck someplace raw. Outside, the wind howled low across the chimney, a mournful sound that had once made Clara feel small, but tonight it felt like it was singing just for them. And in the hush between words, they both began to feel something they hadn't in a long time, like maybe they weren't running anymore. A week passed. The storm moved on, but Ash stayed. His shoulder healed in slow degrees, stiff and sore, but enough to help with chores. He chopped kindling with his good arm, fed the hens, even mended the hinge on the root cellar door without being asked. Clara noticed but didn't say so. Out here, gratitude didn't come with words. It came with fresh coffee at dawn, or an extra blanket left on the cot. That morning, she found him outside early, bootprints stitched across the snow. He was staring off toward the trail that led back to town, jaw tight, hand resting on the wound she gave him. "You're expecting someone?" she asked, stepping onto the porch. Ash shook his head, eyes still distant. "Just listening." "To what?" He turned. Silence. "It's honest out here." Clara studied him. "You keep looking over your shoulder." He exhaled, slow. "Old habits, or old enemies?" Ash didn't answer, but that silence did. Later that day, while Ash hauled water from the creek, Clara went to the saddlebag he'd left tucked by the hearth. She hadn't meant to pry, not at first, but the way he looked toward the trees made something stir uneasy in her gut. Inside the bag was a rolled-up shirt, a tin of bullets, and a letter creased, torn at the edges. No envelope, just a name scrawled in fading ink across the top. Emmett Graves. Her heart dropped. She hadn't heard that name in 7 years, not since her husband was buried with a bullet through his chest and a telegram in her hand, blaming a man by that very name. She stared at it, breath caught. "Find what you needed." Ash's voice came from behind her, low but calm. Clara flinched, eyes lifting slow. "You said your name was Ash." "It is." "Then what's this?" She held up the letter, hand trembling. Ash stepped forward. His face wasn't angry, wasn't even surprised, just tired. "That was my name once," she swallowed. "Then you were there." Ash nodded. "Yeah, I was there." Clara backed away, her voice breaking. "He was unarmed, I know. tears rimmed her eyes, not from sadness this time, but fury. "You shot him?" "No," Ash said, quickly. "I didn't, but I was riding with the men who did. I could have stopped it. I didn't. That's the truth." Clara stared at him, chest heaving. "Why didn't you say something?" "Because I didn't want you to see me the way I see myself," he said softly. "Because I thought maybe, just once, I could be something better." The wind kicked up a low moan through the pines. Clara didn't speak. She just turned, walked back into the cabin, and closed the door behind her. Didn't slam it, didn't lock it, just closed it. Ash stood there in the snow, staring at the scar in the sky where the sun had begun to break through, and for the first time since he stumbled onto her land, Clara didn't know if she wanted him to stay or if she'd survive it. If he left. Ash didn't come inside that night. Clara lay awake, listening to the wind, the old cabin creaking around her like it was holding its breath. She'd left the door unlocked, not as an invitation, but not as a judgment either, just a space, a choice. When morning came, his cot was still empty, but the fire was lit and a fresh stack of wood sat by the hearth. Snow clung to the floorboards. His boots had returned, even if he hadn't. She found him by the edge of the tree line, hood drawn up, hands buried in his coat. He didn't turn when she stepped into the snow behind him. "You planning on disappearing?" she asked, voice flat. "Didn't figure I had a choice," he said. "After what you read, you had a choice the night you let him die," she replied, and Ash winced like the words slapped him. Clara took a breath, jaw tight. "But so did I when I pulled that trigger. When I pulled you into my home." Ash looked down at the snow between them. "Why'd you do it?" After all that, she didn't answer right away, just stared at the snow falling gently onto his shoulders. Then, "Because I don't want to be the kind of person who lets another man freeze to death in her yard, no matter what he's done." He looked at her then, eyes glassed over with guilt and something like hope. "You're not that kind of person, no," she said softly. "But I've been close." The quiet between them settled like powder, cold but weightless. Forgiveness didn't come wrapped in a speech. It didn't need to. It came in that moment when she turned and walked back toward the cabin, and this time, he followed. Inside, Clara ladled stew into 2 bowls without looking at him. Ash took his seat at the table, hands wrapped around the warmth, like it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. She finally sat across from him. "Tell me everything. What really happened that night?" Ash looked up, throat tight. "It was supposed to be a routine supply raid. Union outpost. We thought it'd be empty. Your husband, he wasn't supposed to be there. We got spooked. Shots were fired. I didn't pull the trigger, Clara, but I didn't stop the man who did." He swallowed hard. "Next morning, I quit the group, rode south, burned every name I'd ever gone by. Emmett Graves died in that snow, same as your husband." Clara didn't flinch, but Ash stayed alive. "I didn't think I deserved a new name," he said. "Just needed something that didn't taste like blood in my mouth." Clara stared at him a long time, not with hate, not with sorrow, but with the kind of stillness that comes when you realize something simple and hard. "We all carry ghosts." She reached for her coffee, took a sip, and then said plainly, "If you're staying, you'll need to fix that back porch step." Ash blinked. "You still want me here?" "No," she said, "but I don't want to be alone more." Outside, the wind had died down, and in its place came the soft creak of trees shifting in the thaw. Spring wasn't here yet, but it was coming, and maybe, just maybe, so was healing. Have you ever chosen to forgive someone, even when it hurt? Share your story below. These are the moments that make us human. And come back for story, where Clara's past knocks louder than she expects. By the time the thaw came, Ash had become part of the rhythm. He split wood without being asked, fixed the porch step, and even patched the roof where snowmelt had seeped in. Clara still called him Ash, never Emmett, and never quite smiled when she did, but her voice had lost its edge. Most mornings, they shared coffee without speaking, content with the quiet and the way steam curled around their mugs like fog on the river. Then came the knock. It was just before dusk, sun bleeding orange across the pine line, smoke rising from the chimney in lazy twists. Clara was tending beans over the stove, Ash cleaning his boots by the fire. The sound was soft, almost polite, but it cracked through the stillness like a shot. She froze. Ash looked up, eyes sharp. "No one comes out this far," Clara whispered. Ash stood, slowly. "You expecting someone?" "No," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Not in 7 years. She opened the door with a rifle in her hand. A man stood on the porch, his coat dusty, his mustache flecked with snow. He looked older than he probably was, creased by travel and loss. Behind him stood a boyno, older than 12, with the same dark hair and wary eyes. The man removed his hat. "Ma'am, sorry to trouble you. Name's Silas Dorsey. This here's my nephew, Eli. We're looking for someone." Clara narrowed her eyes. "Who?" Silas glanced past her shoulder to the man now standing behind her. "Used to go by Emmett Graves." Ash stiffened, every muscle locking. Silas gave a slow nod. "Figured we'd find you out here." Clara's grip on the rifle tightened. "What do you want with him?" Silas raised a hand. "Not revenge, not justice, just answers." Ash stepped forward, voice hoarse. "You're Ellis, Dorsey's brother." "I am." Ash lowered his head. "I was with him when he died. He didn't deserve it." "I know," Silas said. "And I know you tried to help him. He told Ely before he passed." Clara looked to the boy, startled. "He survived." "For a while," Silas said. "Long enough to make sure his son knew the truth. Told him about the man who tried to carry him 5 miles back to the creek line when the others ran." Ash's jaw tightened. "Didn't do enough." "You did more than anyone else," Silas said gently. "That's why we came. Eli wanted to meet the man his father spoke of before the end." Ash looked at the boy, this quiet, solemn child whose life was shaped by something he barely remembered. Eli stepped forward, eyes never leaving Ash. "You were kind to him?" the boy asked. Ash nodded. "I tried to be." The boy looked down at the snow, then back up. "Then I'm glad it was you who stayed with him." That moment, silent, fragile, profound, hung between them like breath in cold air. Clara stepped aside, opened the door wider. "You're welcome to come in for supper." Silas smiled, grateful. "We'd be honored." That evening, 4 plates sat on the table instead of 2. Eli asked questions in a quiet voice, and Ash answered every one honestly, carefully. Clara watched the man she once hated become someone she almost trusted, and as the fire burned low and the boy drifted off to sleep by the hearth, Ash looked across the table at Clara. Didn't expect all this. She sipped her coffee. Forgiveness don't usually knock, but sometimes it rides in on tired boots and a boy's questions. Ash looked down, smiling just slightly. "You ever think you'd sit across from a man who helped break your world and not pull a trigger again?" Clara met his eyes. "I think I've lost more by holding on to pain than I ever did by letting go." Outside, the wind had stilled completely, and inside, something sacred began to settle, quiet, like trust being born. The snow began to melt in slow drips from the eaves, and with it, something in Clara softened too. Silas and Eli stayed 2 nights, before heading south toward the settlements. When they rode off at dawn, the boy waved without words, and Ash stood long after the dust settled, watching until the trees swallowed them whole. Clara didn't say goodbye. She just packed them, biscuits, and left them on the saddlehorn. That was her way. In the days that followed, the silence returned, but it was no longer heavy. It was comfortable, like a coat you finally broke in. Then came the letter. Clara found it by accident, tucked behind the stove in an old tin box she hadn't touched. Since her husband died, she'd been searching for twine, but what she found instead was paper browned with age, sealed in wax. It was addressed in her husband's handwriting. To Clara. "If I don't come home." Her breath hitched. She sat at the table, hands trembling as she broke the seal. Ash, who'd been brushing the mule outside, saw her face through the window and came in quiet. He didn't speak, just waited. Clara began to read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "Clara, if this finds you, it means I didn't make it back, and I need you to know something. I joined this fight not because I believed in every man riding with me, but because I believed in protecting what we built. You, the cabin, the quiet we carved out of nothing. And if I fall, don't waste your years chasing anger. Don't let what happened to me steal more than just my body. I've seen too many good men ruined by grief, and too many women freeze their hearts solid. Love again, trust again, even if it ain't fair, even if it hurts. Promise me that." Clara stopped reading, her eyes wet but steady. Ash looked at her, voice rough. "I don't deserve your husband's mercy." She folded the letter carefully. "Maybe not, but I think he'd want me to give it anyway." They sat in silence after that, the fire crackling gently between them. Ash cleared his throat. "You ever think about leaving this place?" Clara looked up. "Once, Then the silence became the only thing that didn't lie to me. He nodded. I get that. She studied him. The man she'd nearly killed. The man who had once ridden with monsters and now shoveled snow from her porch and held her mule like it was sacred. You'd think you'd ever stop running? She asked. Ash leaned back, looking into the flames. If I thought I was running toward something instead of just away, maybe. Clara stood, crossed the room, and gently placed the letter back in its box. Then maybe it's time to stop hiding from yourself. From me. Ash looked up at her, the firelight painting his face in shades of regret and wonder. Clara, he said softly, I don't know how to be the man I should have been. You don't have to be, she replied. Just be the one who stays. Outside, the last of the snow slipped from the cabin's roof in a soft thud. A thaw had begun, not just in the woods, but in her, and somewhere deep inside. Something whispered, you're not alone anymore. It was just past midnight when Ash jolted awake, sweat on his brow. Breath caught in his throat. The fire had died. 2 embers, and moonlight spilled across the cabin floor like silver thread unraveling. Clara was already up. She sat in the rocker by the window, wrapped in her husband's old coat, hands still in her lap, staring into the woods like she was waiting for something or someone. The kind of stillness that didn't come from peace but from holding everything in too long. Ash stepped quietly across the room. Bad dream? He asked. She didn't turn. I don't sleep much, not when it's this quiet. He sat beside her on the floor, back resting against the wall. Funny, it's the quiet that finally lets me sleep. They stayed like that for a long time, 2 shadows sharing the hush. Clara finally spoke. When Elias died, I didn't cry for 3 whole weeks. Not even at the funeral. Folks thought I was strong. Her voice caught. Truth is, I was just scared if I started, I wouldn't stop. Ash didn't respond. Just let the silence carry her voice. She glanced down. You ever been that scared? Ash nodded slowly. Once, right after I left those men. I rode for 3 days without stopping. Not cause anyone was chasing me, but cause I knew I'd have to live with what I saw. He hesitated, then added, and with what I didn't stop. Clara turned toward him. For the first time, her face wasn't guarded. It was bare. I wanted to hate you, Ash. Every time I looked at you, I tried to see only Emmett Graves. The man who didn't pull the trigger, but didn't scream stop loud enough, either. I know. But lately, she shook her head, blinking. I keep seeing the man who bandaged my mule's leg without being asked. Who reads poetry by the fire when he thinks I'm asleep. Who carries guilt so heavy, he forgets how to smile. Ash looked up. I don't know if that man deserves forgiveness. Maybe not, she said. But maybe he deserves a place to rest. Ash stood slowly, offering her his hand. She took it, not out of romance, not yet, just out of need. Out of the quiet understanding that sometimes 2 broken things can lean on each other long enough to stay standing. She followed him to the cot, where he laid back down, and she sat beside him. Her hand lingered on his, warm and steady. Then, softly like it hurt to admit, Clara whispered, I don't want you to go. Ash blinked. You sure? No, she said honestly. But I want to see what happens if you stay. The wind picked up outside, brushing the cabin walls with a low hum, like a lullaby sung by the pines. And in that space between pain and healing, something small and sacred took root, unspoken, but real. The morning after Clara said, I want to see what happens if you stay, something in the rhythm between them shifted. Ash no longer waited for permission to pour her coffee. Clara no longer stiffened when their hands touched. The cabin felt less like a shelter from the world, and more like a place that belonged to them both. But peace on the frontier rarely lasted. 3 days later, while Ash was tending the mule out back, Clara spotted the rider. He came slow down the trailer, younger man in a worn deputy's coat, hat low, one hand resting near his holster. His horse was lathered and travel-weary, and his face bore that look Clara had seen before, the look of someone bringing bad news. She stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand but not raised, just ready. The deputy dismounted and tipped his hat. Ma'am, name's Boyd, from Silver Branch, north of here. Clara said nothing, but her eyes narrowed slightly. He pulled a folded envelope from his coat, looking for a man. Said he might be traveling under the name Ash McRae. Real name's Emmett Graves. Her heart thud before she could answer. Ash stepped out from behind the cabin. I'm here, he said calmly. The deputy turned. His hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, but Ash raised both hands slowly. Ain't gonna run. Boyd studied him. Didn't expect you to. Word is, you've been hiding, not causing trouble. Clara stepped forward. What's this about? Boyd glanced at her, then back at Ash. You were on a wanted list out of Arkansas. Not for murder, though your name was tied to it, but for desertion, theft, and fleeing a federal inquiry. Charges were light. No one pursued M hard. Until a judge died last month. Man you once rode with. Now there's attention again. Ash nodded slowly, resigned. So what happens now? Boyd held out the letter. Technically, I'm just a messenger. Letters from Marshal Ty Dorsey, Silas's cousin. He says if you return willingly, he'll hear you out. Clean record for honest testimony. Clara blinked. He's giving you a choice. Looks that way, Boyd said. But if you don't go now, and they send someone else later, it won't be a letter they bring. Ash took the envelope and stared at it like it weighed more than iron. He didn't open it. Boyd climbed back on his horse. I'll be riding west by morning. If you've got an answer, leave word at the church in Aspen Run. And with that, he disappeared into the pines. Inside the cabin, Clara stood across from Ash as he finally cracked the seal, read it, said nothing. You thinking about going? She asked. He didn't look up. If I do, they might wipe the record. I could finally be free. Clara's voice was quiet. But if you go, I might never see you again. Ash met her eyes, raw and torn. I don't want to leave, but if I don't face it now, I'll always be a man hiding in your shadow. She stepped closer. You're not in my shadow. You're in my home. He laughed once, soft and broken. That's exactly why I need to go. Because this home deserves a man who isn't afraid to stand in the light. Clara looked away. I already lost one man to war and duty. I don't think I could bear losing another to some courthouse full of men who don't know you. Ash cupped her cheek, thumb rough against her skin. But you know me. That's what matters. And for the first time since she buried her husband, Clara began to cry openly, quietly, without shame. I don't want you to be a ghost in my life, she whispered. Then let me go be a man worth staying for. He whispered back. Ash left. Before dawn. Don't know goodbye. No promise. Just his saddlebag gone from the peg, and a note left on the kitchen table, scrawled in his careful hand. Didn't want to wake you. I couldn't look in your eyes and still leave. But I have to see this through. If I don't come back, know that you gave me more peace in one winter than I deserved in a lifetime. Clara read it 3 times before folding it neatly and tucking it into her apron. She didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she poured 2 cups of coffee like always, set one across from her, left it untouched. Then she got to work, the hens, patching the barn door, carrying on like the world hadn't shifted sideways. But every time the wind brushed the porch, she listened harder than she meant to. And every time boots crunched in her dreams, she woke with her heart galloping. Weeks passed. Spring arrived in Elk Creek like it always did, slow and stubborn. Snow gave way to mud. Mud gave way to green. The creek behind the cabin sang again. Birds stitched songs into the silence. Life returned, but not him, until one morning, he did. She saw the rider from the window, leaning forward in the saddle, a little thinner, face darker from the sun. He moved like a man who'd been through something that didn't kill him, but came close. Ash dismounted slowly, favoring his left leg. There was a scar under his jaw she didn't remember. Clara stepped out onto the porch, hands on her hips, eyes not giving anything away. You took your time, she said flatly. He smiled, small, worn, but real. Marshall gave me a deal. Testimony. Full honesty. They cleared my name. You still a wanted man? No, he said. Now I'm just a man. She looked him over. And what are you doing here? Just a man. Ash took off his hat, walked up 1 step, then another. I came back. Because this is where I stopped running. And because this porch, this fire, this quiet felt more like home than anywhere I ever knew. He paused. But if you've changed your mind, she reached out, grabbed the front of his coat, and kissed him. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean, but it was honest. It was everything 2 broken people could offer each other. When she pulled back, she whispered, "Took you long enough." Ash grinned. I had to earn my way back. Later that night, they sat by the fire. Again, same chairs, same rhythm, only now the silence was warm. He read from her mother's old poetry book. She leaned against his shoulder. The world outside kept turning, but inside that cabin in Elk Creek, Two lives finally slowed down enough to belong in the same story, not as strangers, but as home. Have you ever let someone come back and found they returned as someone better? Share your thoughts below. Stories like this aren't just told, they're lived in quiet ways. Every day. Thank you for riding with me through this journey. And if you felt something along the way, I'd love to hear it in the comments.